Imagine this. You wake up in the dead of night, the air thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Your room is cloaked in shadow, the faint glow of moonlight slicing through the curtains like a blade. You sit up, heart pounding, but there's no sound. No creak of the house settling, no distant hum of traffic, nothing. Just the suffocating weight of silence pressing against your chest. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed, and as your bare feet touch the cold floor, a shiver races up your spine, not from the chill, but from a sudden, unshakable feeling. You're not alone. You turn your head, expecting to see a figure in the doorway, a silhouette against the faint light, but there's nothing there. Nothing you can see, at least. Yet the sensation grows, a creeping certainty that something, or someone, is watching you. You stand, your breath shallow, and take a cautious step toward the mirror on the far wall. The glass catches the moonlight, reflecting your pale, wide-eyed face. But as you stare into your own eyes, a jolt of terror seizes you. The reflection isn't just yours. There's a flicker, a distortion, a shadow behind your gaze. Something that looks like you, but isn't. It's the part of you you've spent your entire life running from. What if the thing you fear most isn't out there in the dark, but inside you, woven into the very fabric of who you are? What if the shadow in the mirror isn't a monster, but the truth you've refused to face? The raw, unfiltered version of yourself that you've buried beneath layers of distraction, denial, and carefully constructed masks? You've spent years sprinting through life, chasing goals, building relationships, losing yourself in the noise of the world, all to avoid this moment, this confrontation. But now, in the stillness of this endless night, there's nowhere left to run. The shadow in the mirror tilts its head, mirroring your every move, and a question burns in your mind. What happens when you stop running from yourself? You've always believed that running keeps you safe. You run from the memories that sting like open wounds. The time you failed, the time you hurt someone, the time you weren't enough. You run from the questions that claw at the edges of your consciousness. Why do I feel so empty, even when everything looks perfect on the outside? Why does happiness always slip through my fingers like sand? You run from the quiet moments, because in silence, the shadow speaks louder. It whispers truths you don't want to hear, that you're afraid of being truly seen, that you're terrified of what you might find if you dig too deep, that you've built your entire life on a foundation of avoidance. But what if running isn't the answer? What if every step you take away from that shadow only tightens its grip on you? Consider the paradox. The harder you flee from yourself, the more you become a stranger to who you truly are. You think you're escaping pain, but what if you're actually running toward a greater suffering, a life half-lived, a soul fragmented, a heart that never truly beats as one? The shadow in the mirror doesn't move closer, but it doesn't retreat either. It waits, patient and unyielding, as if it knows something you don't. What would happen if you turned toward it instead of away? What would happen if, just for a moment, you stopped running and faced the reflection? Not the one you've polished for the world, but the one that holds every scar, every fear, every unspoken dream? The thought alone sends a tremor through you, a mix of dread and something else, something that feels dangerously like curiosity. You've spent so long defining yourself by what you're not, by what you refuse to see, that the idea of confronting it feels like stepping into a void. But what if that void isn't empty? What if it's the doorway to everything you've been searching for? The shadow in the mirror doesn't speak, but its presence is a challenge, a dare that echoes in the silence of the night. Stop running. Face me. See what happens. You take a step closer, your reflection trembling in the glass, and as your fingers brush the cold surface, a question lodges itself in your throat, heavy with possibility. What have you been running from all this time? And what might you find if you finally stand still? You stand there inches from the mirror, your fingers still grazing the cold glass. The shadow in your reflection doesn't waver. It's as much a part of you as your own heartbeat, a silent companion you've carried through every moment of your life, even when you refuse to acknowledge its presence. You've stopped running for now, but the weight of that decision presses against you, heavy with questions you've never dared to ask. Why have you been so afraid to face this shadow? Why does the idea of looking into your own depths feel like staring into an abyss? To understand this, you must first uncover the hidden problem, a force so insidious it shapes your every thought, your every choice, without you even realizing it. The truth is, you've been conditioned to run from yourself. This isn't just a personal failing, it's a human condition, rooted deep in the psychological and philosophical fabric of existence. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who plumbed the depths of the human psyche, called this shadow the unconscious self, the repository of everything you repress, deny, or fear about yourself. Jung believed that the shadow isn't inherently evil. It's simply the part of you that doesn't fit the persona you've crafted for the world. But because it's hidden, it festers, growing stronger in the dark. You've been taught to see it as a threat, a Pandora's box of shame and vulnerability, so you shove it down, lock it away, and keep moving. But what Jung understood, and what you're beginning to sense, is that ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear. It only gives it more power over you. This compulsion to run is also philosophical, a product of existential dread that thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche wrestled with. Sartre argued that humans are cursed with freedom to define themselves, to create meaning in a world that offers none. But with that freedom comes anguish, because to truly define yourself, you must confront the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. Most people, Sartre observed, flee this responsibility through bad faith, a kind of self-deception where you pretend to be something you're not, clinging to roles, labels, and societal expectations to avoid the terror of authentic existence. You've done this too, haven't you? You've played the part of the dutiful child, the successful professional, the loyal friend, all while ignoring the voice inside that whispers, "This isn't really you." Nietzsche takes this further, suggesting that the fear of self-confrontation is tied to the will to power, not just over others but over yourself. He believed that true strength lies in overcoming your inner chaos, in staring into the abyss and emerging stronger. But you've been taught the opposite, to avoid the abyss at all costs, to fill your life with noise and distraction so you never have to face the chaos within. Society reinforces this, doesn't it? It tells you to keep busy, to achieve, to consume, to compare, anything to keep you from sitting in silence with yourself. Aldous Huxley warned of this in Brave New World, where he depicted a future where people are so numbed by pleasure and distraction that they never confront their true selves. You're not so different. You scroll through your phone, binge watch shows, chase promotions, all to drown out the shadow's whispers. But the more you run, the louder it gets. Psychologically, this avoidance is a defense mechanism, a survival tactic etched into your brain. The amygdala, that ancient part of your mind wired for fight or flight, perceives the shadow as a threat, because to face it means confronting pain, uncertainty, and the possibility that you've been living a lie. So you flee, seeking safety in the familiar, even if that safety is an illusion. But here's the cruel irony. The more you avoid the shadow, the more it shapes you. It seeps into your behavior, your emotions, your identity. You lash out in anger when you feel exposed because deep down, you fear being seen. You chase validation from others because you can't validate yourself. You feel a gnawing emptiness because you've abandoned the parts of you that make you whole. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that life is a pendulum swinging between boredom and suffering. But what if the true suffering comes from never stopping to face yourself? What if the emptiness you feel isn't a lack of achievement or love, but a lack of connection to your own soul? The shadow isn't just a collection of flaws, it's also where your deepest truths live. Your unexpressed desires, your buried passions, the dreams you've dismissed as impractical. By running from it, you're not just avoiding pain, you're avoiding life itself. And the consequences of this avoidance are far greater than you might think. You might believe you're protecting yourself, But what if you're actually imprisoning yourself? What if the shadow, left unchecked, isn't just a passive observer, but an active force, subtly steering your life in ways you can't even see? The longer you run, the tighter its grip becomes, and the deeper its influence seeps into every corner of your existence. You're standing at the edge of a precipice now, the mirror still reflecting that shadow, and you can feel the weight of what's at stake. What happens when you ignore this force for too long? What happens when the shadow stops waiting and starts to take control? The mirror reflects your trembling silhouette, the shadow in your gaze growing more defined with each passing second. You can feel it now, not just as a presence, but as a force, a current beneath the surface of your life that's been pulling the strings all along. You've spent years running from this shadow, believing that avoidance was your shield, but what you didn't realize is how deeply its influence has seeped into every corner of your existence. The consequences of running from yourself aren't loud or dramatic. They're silent, insidious, and far more destructive than you could have imagined. They've shaped your reality, your relationships, your very sense of being, and now, standing on the precipice of this confrontation, you're beginning to see the cost of your flight. Consider how this shadow has silently sculpted your personal reality. Every time you've turned away from the uncomfortable truths within, the insecurities, the regrets, the unfulfilled desires, you've handed it more power. It's not just that you've avoided pain, you've also surrendered control. Psychologically, this avoidance plays into cognitive biases that keep you trapped in a cycle of self-deception. Take the confirmation bias, for instance. You seek out experiences, people, and beliefs that reinforce the version of yourself you want to see, the polished, acceptable mask, while dismissing anything that threatens to reveal the shadow. You surround yourself with friends who validate your choices, scroll through social media feeds that mirror your curated identity, and chase goals that align with society's definition of success, all while ignoring the quiet voice inside that says, "This isn't enough." But what happens when the mask slips? What happens when the life you've built on avoidance starts to crack under the weight of its own falsehoods? Neurologically, this avoidance has rewired your brain in ways you can't easily undo. When you consistently run from the shadow, your brain learns to associate self-reflection with danger. The amygdala, that primal alarm system, lights up at the mere thought of facing your inner truths, triggering a stress response that sends you scrambling for distractions. Your phone, your work, your next Netflix binge. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. The more you avoid, the more your brain perceives the shadow as a threat, and the more you avoid. It's a vicious cycle, one that keeps you locked in a state of perpetual flight. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has shown that emotions and decision-making are deeply intertwined. When you suppress the emotions tied to your shadow, fear, shame, longing, you impair your ability to make authentic choices. You end up living a life dictated by fear rather than truth, a life where every decision is a reaction to the shadow you refuse to face. Culturally, you've been conditioned to keep running, and the consequences ripple outward, shaping not just your personal reality, but the society you inhabit. You live in a world that glorifies distraction and external validation. Think of the endless scroll of social media, where curated perfection is the currency of worth, or the corporate grind that equates busyness with value. This cultural conditioning, as Viktor Frankl might argue, strips you of the very thing that gives life meaning, the pursuit of self-understanding. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, believed that meaning arises from confronting suffering, not avoiding it. But society teaches you the opposite: to numb the pain, to fill the silence, to measure your worth by what you achieve rather than who you are. And so, you run, not just from yourself, but from the possibility of a deeper, more meaningful existence. What happens to a society full of people running from their shadows? It becomes a collective of masks, a hollow performance where no one truly knows themselves or each other. The unseen consequences don't stop there. The shadow you've ignored doesn't just sit idly by. It manifests in ways you might not even recognize. It shows up in the relationships you sabotage because you're afraid of being truly seen, in the opportunities you pass up because you don't believe you're worthy, in the quiet moments of despair when you wonder why you feel so disconnected from the life you've built. It's in the anger that flares when someone gets too close to your vulnerabilities, in the envy you feel scrolling through someone else's highlight reel, in the exhaustion that weighs on you even after a full night's sleep. The shadow isn't passive, it's active, and the longer you run, the more it takes over, steering your life in ways that keep you small, fragmented, and unfulfilled. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is the loss of your potential. The shadow isn't just a repository of flaws, it's also where your greatest strengths live. The passions you've suppressed, the dreams you've dismissed, the authenticity you've buried under layers of fear. By running from it, you've locked away the parts of yourself that could lead to a life of purpose, creativity, and connection. What might you have become if you'd faced the shadow sooner? What might you still become if you stop running now? The mirror reflects not just your fear, but the possibility of something greater, a life where you're no longer a prisoner of your own avoidance. The shadow in the mirror seems to grow sharper now, its edges more defined, as if it senses your dawning awareness. You can feel the urgency building, a pressure in your chest that tells you time is running out. The consequences of running from yourself have already shaped so much of your life. Your choices, your relationships, your very sense of who you are. But what if there's a way to break free? What if the shadow, for all its weight, isn't your enemy but your guide? You're on the verge of a rebellion, a radical act of defiance against everything you've been taught to fear. The question now is, are you ready to take the first step? The mirror holds your gaze, the shadow in your reflection, no longer a distant specter but a tangible presence, its edges sharp and unyielding. You've seen the consequences of running from yourself, the way it's fractured your life, dimmed your potential, and left you adrift in a sea of avoidance. But now, standing at this crossroads, a new energy surges within you, a spark of defiance that feels both foreign and fiercely alive. What if you don't have to live this way anymore? What if the shadow you feared isn't a prison but a key to unlocking the life you've always sensed but never dared to claim? This is the moment of rebellion, the moment you stop running and start fighting for the truth of who you are. Breaking free begins with a radical shift in perspective, a willingness to challenge everything you've been taught about yourself. You've spent your life believing that the shadow is something to fear, something to bury. But what if that belief is the true prison? Carl Jung, who spent his life exploring the depths of the human psyche, argued that the path to wholeness lies in integrating the shadow, not rejecting it. This means turning toward the parts of yourself you've avoided, the shame, the fear, the unfulfilled desires, and seeing them not as flaws, but as fragments of a greater whole. You've been taught to equate vulnerability with weakness, but what if vulnerability is your greatest strength? What if the act of facing your shadow is the most courageous thing you can do? Start by sitting with the discomfort. The next time you feel the urge to run, when a painful memory surfaces, when a difficult emotion rises, when the silence threatens to swallow you whole, don't reach for your phone, don't turn on the TV, don't drown yourself in work. Instead, sit still, breathe, let the feeling wash over you like a wave, and notice what it's trying to tell you. Psychologists call this emotional tolerance, the ability to experience discomfort without fleeing from it. It's not easy. Your amygdala will scream at you to escape, your heart will race, your mind will flood with distractions, but every moment you stay present is a victory. You're teaching your brain that the shadow isn't a threat, that you're stronger than your fear. This rebellion also demands that you question the narratives you've accepted about yourself. Society has handed you a script. Be productive. Be perfect. Be what others expect. But that script isn't yours. It's a lie designed to keep you running, to keep you small. Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of bad faith comes to mind again. You've been living as if you're a fixed role, a product of external expectations, rather than a free being capable of defining yourself. So, tear up the script. Ask yourself, Who am I when no one's watching? What do I truly want, not what I've been told to want? The answers might scare you. They might lead you to quit the job you hate, to end the relationship that's draining you, to pursue the dream you've buried, but they'll also lead you to a life that's yours, not someone else's. History is full of those who broke free by embracing their shadows. Consider Friedrich Nietzsche, who faced his own inner turmoil, his loneliness, his illness, his existential despair, and channeled it into a philosophy of self-overcoming. He didn't run from his pain. He used it to create, to grow, to become the superhuman he envisioned. Or think of Frida Kahlo, whose physical and emotional suffering became the raw material for her art, her self-portraits, a defiant act of self-confrontation. These figures didn't achieve greatness by avoiding their shadows. They did so by diving into them, by transforming their pain into power. You can do the same. Your shadow isn't just a burden. It's a source of creativity, resilience, and authenticity, if only you'll claim it. But breaking free isn't just about facing the shadow. It's about building a new way of thinking, a mindset that honors your whole self. Start by practicing radical self-acceptance. This doesn't mean excusing your flaws, but acknowledging them as part of your humanity. You're not perfect, and you never will be, but neither is anyone else. The shadow you feared is the same shadow everyone carries, and the moment you accept it, you'll find a freedom you didn't know was possible. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the horrors of a concentration camp, believed that true freedom lies in choosing your attitude, no matter the circumstance. Choose to see your shadow not as a curse, but as a teacher. Let it guide you toward what you've been missing: connection, purpose, a life that feels real. You'll also need to cultivate silence, the very thing you've spent your life avoiding. Silence is where the shadow speaks, where you can hear the truths you've drowned out with noise. Set aside time each day to be still. No distractions, no excuses. Meditate, journal, or simply sit with your thoughts. Ask the shadow, what do you want me to know? What have I been too afraid to see? The answers will come slowly, in fragments, but they'll come. And with each truth you uncover, you'll feel the chains of avoidance loosen, replaced by a quiet strength you didn't know you had. As you stand before the mirror, the shadow in your reflection seems to soften, its edges less harsh, its presence less threatening. You're beginning to understand that this rebellion isn't just about escaping a trap. It's about reclaiming your power. You've spent so long running from yourself, but now you're learning to stand still, to face the shadow, to listen. And in that act of defiance, you're discovering something revolutionary. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that's been waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be whole. But there's one final step, one ultimate truth that will redefine everything you thought you knew about yourself. Are you ready to uncover it? The mirror before you no longer feels like a barrier. It's a portal now, a gateway to a truth that's been waiting for you all along. The shadow in your reflection has shifted, its form less menacing, its gaze almost beckoning. You've stopped running, faced the shadow, and begun to reclaim the parts of yourself you've long buried. But there's one final revelation, one ultimate truth that will redefine everything you thought you knew about yourself and the life you've lived. This truth isn't just a conclusion, it's a paradigm shift, a seismic reordering of your reality that makes every struggle, every moment of avoidance suddenly clear. You're on the edge of something profound, something that will leave you forever changed. What if the shadow you've spent your life running from isn't a separate entity at all? What if it's not a flaw to be eradicated, not a burden to be carried, but the very essence of who you are? You've been taught to see yourself as fragmented, good and bad, light and dark, acceptable and unacceptable. But that's a lie, a construct designed to keep you at war with yourself. The ultimate truth is this: you are whole, exactly as you are. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's the missing piece of your soul, the part you've disowned in your quest to be what the world demands. And the moment you embrace it, you don't just stop running, you start living. This realization flips everything you've believed on its head. You've spent years trying to outrun the shadow, thinking it held only pain, shame, and weakness. But what if it also holds your greatest strengths? The fears you've hidden are also the source of your courage, because to feel fear is to know what it means to overcome it. The desires you've suppressed are the seeds of your purpose, because they point to what you truly love, what sets your heart ablaze. Even the wounds you've buried are the roots of your compassion, because they've taught you what it means to hurt, and in turn, what it means to heal. Carl Jung called this integration the path to individuation, the process of becoming whole by embracing every part of yourself. But this isn't just a psychological concept, it's a spiritual awakening, a return to the truth of your being. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the darkest of circumstances, once wrote that the greatest freedom lies in finding purpose, even in suffering. What if your purpose isn't something you need to search for out there in the world, but something you've been carrying within you all along? The shadow you feared is the map to that purpose. It holds the dreams you've dismissed, the passions you've ignored, the authenticity you've traded for approval. By running from it, you've been running from your own meaning. But now, as you stand before the mirror, you can see it clearly. The shadow isn't a threat. It's a guide, leading you back to the life you were always meant to live. This truth redefines your past struggles in a way that's almost dizzying. Every moment you spent running, every time you turned away from the shadow, wasn't a failure. It was a lesson, a step on the journey to this moment. The pain you felt wasn't meaningless. It was the shadow calling you home, begging you to listen. The emptiness you've wrestled with wasn't a lack of achievement or love. It was the ache of a soul yearning to be whole. Even the masks you've worn, the roles you've played, were a necessary part of the process. They kept you safe until you were ready to face the truth. You're not broken. You never were. You've been on a journey of becoming, and the shadow has been your companion all along, waiting for the moment you'd finally see it for what it is. Now, imagine a life where you no longer run. Picture waking up each morning with a quiet certainty, a deep knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are. Feel the weight of avoidance lift from your shoulders, replaced by a lightness you haven't known since childhood. See yourself moving through the world unapologetically. Your shadow, no longer a secret, but a source of strength, a wellspring of creativity and connection. You speak your truth without fear, because you face the parts of yourself you once thought were unlovable. You pursue your passions without hesitation, because you've uncovered the desires you buried. You love more deeply, because you've learned to love yourself, shadow and all. As you stand before the mirror, the shadow in your reflection seems to dissolve, not because it's gone, but because it's no longer separate from you. It merges into your image, and for the first time you see yourself as whole. The moonlight in the room softens, the stillness no longer suffocating but sacred, as if the universe itself is bearing witness to your transformation. You take a deep breath, and with it comes a question, not of fear, but of possibility. What will you do with this newfound wholeness? The answer isn't something you need to rush to find. It's a question to carry with you, a spark to guide you as you step into the world anew. You've stopped running from yourself, and in doing so, you've discovered a truth that changes everything. You are not a fragment, not a mask, not a shadow. You are a universe, vast and complete, and the life you've been searching for has been within you all along. Now, go live it.